There's a particular sound the ocean makes when it loves you back. It's not just the crash of the waves or the distant gulls cutting across the air. It's the breath beneath it, the rhythm that syncs with your pulse. For me, the sea has always been the place where I felt most myself. Not just as a surfer or a yogi or the woman who somehow won first place at Huntington 2 years in a row, but as Alicia, someone who was always a little too wild to fit comfortably on dry land. I started surfing professionally in my late 20s, after a short-lived marketing career that made my soul shrink a little more every morning. By the time David turned 10, I was already moonlighting as a yoga teacher and spending dawns with a board under my arm. I was 31 when I won my first local competition. After that, everything changed. Magazine interviews, sponsorships, a string of neon-colored wetsuits I wore like armor. But more than any of that, it gave David and me something to orbit around. Just the two of us. Always the two of us. We live in Venice Beach, sand in the sink, breeze in the curtains, the ocean always humming through our windows. It's our home. He's 19 now, which still catches me off guard when he towers next to me, grabbing my board off the roof rack like it weighs nothing. I had him young, barely 19 myself, and people often mistake us for siblings. I used to correct them. Now I mostly just smile. 2 years ago I started seeing Luke. He's 34. Surfer, bartender, well-meaning but not always present. My friends, all a decade younger, joked that I'd finally found someone age-appropriate. I laughed and shrugged, but the truth is I always felt more like myself with younger crowds. They still move through the world like it hasn't made up its mind about them yet. I like that energy. Luke was good to me. Thoughtful. His admiration ran deep, almost to worship. But it often felt like he loved me because he needed to believe in someone more than he needed to know them. I wasn't always sure if he saw me or the image of me. Still, I let it continue. Sometimes being loved, just being the receiver, feels like enough. David accepted Luke with the quiet grace he's inherited from me. Never confrontational but watchful. They got along. But I always had the feeling David was taking mental notes, cataloging Luke's absences as much as his affections. Surfing is where David and I stay closest. He started at 15, not because he wanted to compete but because he wanted to share something with me. I taught him myself. Watching him get up on his first wave was like watching a part of me bloom in someone else's body. His balance came naturally. He was fluid, intuitive. He didn't push it, didn't want sponsors. He just wanted to ride beside me. And that was enough. Until that day. Until the wave that should have been clean curled with a violence I didn't anticipate. I remember the moment it hit, more like a punch than a fall. My shoulder tore in a way I can still hear if I close my eyes. I tried to paddle, screamed for David, but everything blurred. The pain shot through me so fiercely I couldn't even cling to the board. Next thing I remember, I was on the sand, coughing salt, David's face wide with fear as he cradled my head, shouting for help. Then darkness. When I woke up, hospital lights burned like morning after a bad night. My arm was immobilized in a sling. My shoulder, my surfing shoulder, was fractured at the joint. I turned my head and there he was. David. Slouched in a plastic chair, hoodie half-zipped, eyes rimmed red. "Hey," I whispered and my voice cracked like old vinyl. His head snapped up. Relief and guilt collided on his face. "Mom, you're okay." And then I asked the question I already knew the answer to. "Is Luke coming?" David hesitated. I called him. Said he's got stuff. Said he'll try later. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. David's silence mirrored mine. We both understood. Luke had been tested and he had chosen something else. I turned my face to the wall. And I cried, not from pain, but because suddenly I wasn't sure if I was ever going to feel the ocean love me back again. The ride home from the hospital was quiet, except for the occasional hum of tires on wet asphalt. David drove my car. I sat in the passenger seat, my arm secured tight in its sling, a bag of prescriptions rustling softly at my feet. The sky was overcast, gray but not unfriendly, like it was waiting for me to decide whether I would cry again. David kept glancing over as if afraid I might vanish. "You okay?" he asked, his voice barely above the sound of the air vents. I nodded, but the truth was I wasn't. I didn't know what I was. I'd spent years building my identity around strength, fluid motion, mastery of my body, and in a second, it had all unraveled. What was I now, if not the woman in the wetsuit with a board under her arm racing the tide? When we got home, David took over. Completely. Quietly. gracefully. He carried my things inside without needing to be asked. Made a pot of jasmine tea, my favorite. He folded the blankets on the couch just the way I liked, set them down without saying a word, and then went about the house tending to things I'd always done. By the second day he was washing laundry, shopping for groceries, chopping vegetables, checking my temperature, tucking pillows behind me. There was no hesitation, no sense of obligation. He just did it. And I saw him differently. Not as my boy. Not as the teenager who once sat cross-legged beside me on the sand, chattering about school. But as something else. Man, really. A steady, quiet man whose every movement said, "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." Luke didn't show. Not the next day. Not the one after. 8 days passed before he appeared. 8 days. He didn't bring flowers. Or food. Or so much as an apology. He knocked on the door like nothing had happened, sunglasses perched lazily on his forehead, and some flippant excuse already prepared. I looked at him for a long moment. And then I lost it. "Leave. Ailish, come on, I've been busy." "No," I said, voice sharper than I'd expected. "Not today. Not this time." He started to speak again, but I cut him off, my broken arm throbbing beneath the sling. "You had 8 days. 8. And when I needed you, when I couldn't even lift my own arm, you were busy. But David? He's done everything. He didn't wait to be asked. He just showed up." Luke's expression faltered. His eyes flicked toward the open living room where David was sitting, not pretending not to listen. I took a breath. "The truth is, when it really mattered, you were transparent. I could see right through you." Luke's mouth opened, but no words came. "Goodbye, Luke." I shut the door without another word. That night, I sat on the couch, bundled in the blanket David had folded earlier, watching him move around the kitchen. His hair was messy. He wore an old hoodie and gym shorts. Nothing spectacular. And yet, everything about him radiated something that made me feel safer than I had in years. Later I couldn't sleep. I stood in the hallway watching the moonlight spill across the floorboards. My shoulder ached, but my heart ached more. The kind of ache you feel when something shifts inside you so subtly but permanently. It was as though something had turned its face toward the sun, and I hadn't noticed until now. David stepped out of his room, surprised to see me standing there. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded, even though tears were in my eyes. He crossed the hall and pulled me gently into a one-armed hug, careful not to touch my injury. I leaned against him, and for the first time since the fall I let myself feel the full weight of it. Not just the pain but the fear of losing who I was. "You've done so much," I whispered. "I'd do more if I could," he said, his voice low, warm. In the quiet of that hallway, under the hush of the moon and the hum of the sea outside, something passed between us. A current. Familiar. Strong. Not romantic. Not forbidden. Just intimate. Deeper than any label. I had given him life. And somehow now he was giving it back to me. It's strange how quickly you start measuring your life in small victories when something breaks. Not just the bone, though my shoulder was a constant reminder of the crash, but the identity around it. I stopped thinking about upcoming competitions, endorsements, or beach classes. I thought in terms of minutes I could stand without fatigue. How long I could sleep without pain. Whether I could butter toast one-handed. David kept track of those victories for me. With unwavering patience he did what needed doing. Laundry, dishes, groceries, bills, and somehow made me feel like none of it was a burden. He didn't hover, didn't martyr himself. He just was. Present. Grounded. Strong. I began to realize something I'd taken for granted. In raising him, I had unknowingly raised the kind of man I had always longed to meet. 3 weeks after I came home, I returned to the hospital for a checkup. David insisted on driving. I protested half-heartedly, but truthfully I was tired of pretending I could do things alone. My orthopedic specialist, a gruff man with bright, intelligent eyes, tapped gently at my shoulder and ran through the usual tests. Then he grinned, an actual grin. "Well," he said, folding his arms, "looks like you've been healing like a champ. 3 months and you can start easing back into training." "Surfing?" I asked, not daring to breathe. With caution. "But yes. Moderate waves. Light paddling at first. You're ahead of schedule." The words knocked the wind out of me. In a good way. I let out a laugh, sharp, disbelieving, and turned to David, who was beaming. Without thinking, I threw my good arm around him and pulled him into a full-bodied hug. Then I kissed his cheek. Close to the mouth. In the flurry of joy it felt natural, loving, full of gratitude. Like something shared between soulmates. The doctor raised an eyebrow. "Your husband will be thrilled," he said. David and I looked at each other, then burst out laughing at the same time. "No," I said between giggles. "He's my son. My son who takes better care of me than most men ever have." The doctor chuckled, slightly embarrassed. David just grinned. "You two have a bond," he said. "It shows." When we walked out of the hospital, the sun was warm on my skin. For the first time in weeks, the air didn't feel heavy. I was laughing, really laughing. David had his arm around my back, careful of my shoulder. "Want to celebrate?" he asked. I nodded. "What did you have in mind?" "A surprise. But you have to trust me." I gave him a sideways look. "You're asking me to put my life in the hands of a teenage boy." "I'm 19, he said. "Barely." I smirked. "That's my point." We drove up the coast, passing familiar coves and stretches of sand until we turned onto a private road that snaked through wild brush and pale dunes. At the end of it, just over a low rise, was a beach I had never seen before. Isolated. Untouched. The kind of place you only find by accident or deep intention. David parked, helped me down the uneven trail and guided me to the sand. I stood there for a long time taking it in. The water was calm today. Light turquoise, gentle. The waves whispered, not roared. "I found this spot a few weeks ago," he said quietly. "I've been saving it for when you were ready." I turned to look at him. "You did all this for me?" He nodded, then hesitated. "Do you like it, my strongest in the world beauty?" The words made me blink. My throat caught on something unnamed. He said it with warmth, yes, but something else lingered behind it. Something tender. Reverent. I smiled, tried to play it off. "Where'd you learn to say stuff like that?" "You," he said. "I've been listening." I reached for him, pulling him into a hug. Not the quick kind. The long, quiet kind that says everything words won't. His arms wrapped around me, strong and sure. But it lingered. Longer than usual. When I pulled back to look at him, something in his gaze had shifted. It wasn't about admiration or pride. It was searching. He studied me as if seeing something new. Then, almost a whisper, "What if they're all right? The people who think we're a couple. What if that's not so crazy?" My breath caught. I looked at him, really looked. His face, so familiar it was etched into my heart, now felt close in a different way. His eyes weren't pleading. They were open. Honest. "David," I said, unsure where I was going with it. This is too complicated. Too scary." He reached up gently, his fingers brushing my lips. "Or maybe it's not scary at all," he whispered. "Maybe it just takes one of us being brave." I didn't move. Didn't speak. Then before I could stop him, he kissed me. Just a brush. Light. Lingering. Full of something neither of us knew how to name. But it was there. And undeniable. We stood there like that for what felt like hours, the wind moving around us, the sea breathing beside us. When we finally drove home, neither of us spoke much. But something had shifted. Something irreversible. That evening, the sun dipped low, the house bathed in peach-colored light. I sat on the patio. David made drinks. Nothing strong, just something fruity and soft. We clinked glasses without words. Later, while the music played low from my phone, he asked if I wanted my shoulder massaged. I hesitated, then nodded. He brought the gel and sat behind me on the couch, warm hands careful and slow. He pulled the strap of my top aside, baring just the skin above the injury. The touch wasn't urgent. It was intentional. Caring. I exhaled. "This is intimate," I murmured. He didn't stop. "I like doing this," he said. "You're good at it." He bent slightly, his breath warm near my ear. "You have the most incredible body on the planet." Goosebumps spread across my arms. But I didn't stop him. Not then. Not anymore. The next morning I stood in front of the mirror, my reflection washed in the amber light of sunrise. My sling was gone now, though the shoulder still ached on cold mornings. The doctor said the pain might linger for a while, but I'd grown used to carrying weight in places no one could see. I traced the faint scar with my fingertips and thought about everything that had happened in the last few months, especially in the last few weeks. The loneliness. The recovery. The strange magnetic gravity between David and me that had started pulling us in directions I wasn't sure either of us understood. There's a kind of intimacy that comes from survival. When someone sees you, really sees you, broken, frightened, exposed, and stays. It's easy to confuse that with something else. Something more. Especially when the rest of the world has disappointed you. But clarity can arrive like sunlight. That morning David made coffee like he always did. He was barefoot in his usual worn hoodie. I sat across from him at the kitchen table watching him stir sugar into both our mugs like muscle memory. "I've been thinking," I said quietly. He looked up. "Yeah. About us. About the beach. About that night." He didn't flinch. He just set the spoon down and folded his hands, waiting. "I think," I continued, "that we were both feeling things that weren't about romance. They were about being seen. About being needed." David's jaw tensed slightly, but he nodded. "You were my rock," I said. "And I started leaning on you in ways that weren't fair. Ways that blurred the line between being taken care of and being emotionally dependent." He looked at me, a strange tenderness in his eyes. "You weren't the only one confused. I think I wanted to be everything you needed, because I didn't want to lose you." I exhaled, blinking away the sting behind my eyes. "You didn't. And you won't." Silence wrapped around us, not uncomfortable, just full. A silence that held understanding instead of tension. Then I reached across the table and took his hand. "You're becoming the kind of man I always hoped you would. But I need to step back now. Start finding my strength again. And you need to live your life, free of me leaning too hard." His fingers curled around mine. "I can do that. But I'll always show up when it counts." "I know you will." We drove to the beach that afternoon, the same secret cove he'd found for me. The water was calm, clear, ready. I unzipped my wetsuit slowly, the fabric snug and unfamiliar after months away. David stood beside me, board in hand, quiet. "You're sure?" he asked. I smiled. "It's time." The first paddle out was slow. My shoulder ached, yes, but it held. The sea cradled me, cautious at first. And then the rhythm returned like an old dance. I caught a small wave, nothing grand, but it lifted me just enough to feel that thrill again, the whisper of flight. When I reached shore again, David was waiting. "You looked good out there," he said. "I felt alive again," I answered. That evening we built a fire on the beach just like we used to. We sat side by side, our toes buried in cool sand, watching the last embers of daylight sink into the ocean. "I've got a big life ahead," David said softly. "I know. And you do too. Maybe even bigger than before." I looked at him, the boy who'd grown into a man right in front of me. My son. My anchor. My friend. We didn't need anything else. We already had everything. We loved each other. And this was a silent knowledge for us that always remains inside each of us.